So I'm from the technology organization at Primus, and my aim here today is to just give you a little bit of what we're seeing from some of our customers, a couple of case studies as we get into it, a little bit of what is the cloud, tell me about the cloud, what can it do for me, and those sorts of things. And we can speed through this and so forth. So first off, the first question a lot of people ask, tell me about the cloud, what is it, and so on. I have certain things in my mind I can tell you in terms of what it is or isn't. You can't hear that, can you? I'll tell you the audio track's fantastic. Basically, this is our typical Philadelphia cream cheese commercial about the cloud. This is not the cloud that we're talking about. This is the dreamy environment that we'd all like to think about that the cloud would be, where everything works just as planned and so forth. It's actually, we're in IT. It rarely works out like you plan. IT is a lot more about figuring out how to make it a little bit better than it's turned out to be than it actually was supposed to be. And so another clip, this is often a little bit more what we experience. And here their windows are crashing, so Windows crash, that should be a little bit more typical for us. Getting into a cloud deployment can often start off as it's going to be great, it's going to be perfect, and so on. But the more you get into it, the more you often find out that things don't work quite as you expect. There, my data center just flew by. I don't know if you saw that. So again, taking you through some of what's in the cloud and so forth. So some of the types of cloud, there are the internal cloud environments where customers will deploy their own, or IT organizations will deploy their own cloud environments internally. This could be through virtualization or what have you. There are public clouds, such as you'll find out on the internet. You can buy from a lot of providers out there, such as Primus, but a lot of other providers as well, that offer public, accessible over the internet type of environments. There are private clouds where customers can approach a provider and build a custom cloud just for themselves. And then lastly, there are hybrid clouds, which mix or integrate some of the aspects of all of these. So at Primus, how do we distinguish the cloud from standard virtualization or what have you? There are three key aspects that we look at. Number one, as a service. The cloud is something, you don't buy it. You don't purchase a cloud. You can't go pick up a six-pack at Costco of cloud. This tends to be something that you acquire as a service, something that you acquire as a monthly fee or an annual fee or something that is flexible in that respect. It is location independent. It can exist anywhere or even wherever. It's not something that is installed in a single place. It's something that is amalgamated of many things in many places. And then lastly, it's on demand. That allows it to scale up or down, both of which are equally important, and so forth. So the value of the cloud comes from a lot of things. We can talk about cost savings or business agility or elastic computing, the ability to expand or contract your needs as time goes, the ability to be geography non-specific. We have offices in 5 cities. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that we need to have our data center or our infrastructure in 5 cities. It could be somewhere else altogether. Being geography non-specific allows the disconnection of the application from the user. Ease of deployment and operation. You don't need to do quite as much of that physical infrastructure planning long in advance. You're able to leverage something that already exists across many other users at the same time, whether that's inside your company, outside, shared, and so forth. And then lastly, it takes the redundancy or resiliency of your infrastructure out of the equation. No longer do we in IT end up planning hardware and planning infrastructure and maintenance cycles and upgrade cycles and what have you. Now we're able to leverage a provider or internal or external providers' abilities to deliver us that redundancy, the scalability and performance and all that. I like to say it just takes, I think I mentioned, it takes hardware out of the equation. We no longer think in terms of, is this the right box for me? Frankly, it takes the box right out of the picture. So some of the service types that we see today. The first type of cloud applications that we're all familiar with are the software as a service. And these are things, whether they're Salesforce.com, down to Gmail, to another Salesforce application called Chatter. These are the things that we reach on the net. We used to think of these as hosted apps. This is the software as a service model. The next would be more of a platform as a service. This is where customers can seek out a platform to build their applications on top of. You hear about Google has theirs, Amazon has theirs. These are the typical examples that we often think of. But Facebook is also platform as a service, if you think of it. If you build a game for Facebook, you don't necessarily run your own infrastructure for that game. That game is running inside the Facebook platform. And therefore, in that respect, Facebook appears as a platform as a service type of provider too. And lastly, the area that we focus in is infrastructure as a service, which is your access to capacity or hardware, the infrastructure, the network, and what have you. By adopting these as a service, you can take a lot of the IT issues that you're facing and frankly hand them off to somebody else, which in this case I happen to be talking about this is Primus, but any providers that you would choose. Two other aspects of infrastructure as a service are, this is very key for Canadian business because in the case of platform as a service, you have to adopt somebody else's development environment and start to use their ways of developing for your own app. There's a lot of rework that you need to do. You need to rethink how your application works and interacts for them. In a platform as a service model, you're actually taking on an entirely new application altogether. You're not able to take what you have and simplify it by moving into the cloud. With infrastructure as a service, you can take your existing platform, move it up into the cloud, keeping everything as intact as possible, sort of the minimum amount of fuss and muss to get the maximum amount of benefit. The last piece I did mention, server power, network power, et cetera, that can grow up or down, equally as important as the case requires. So a couple of infrastructure as a service case studies. First, this is a case study of a customer of ours. It was a GTA-based logistics company that had a very small IT staff, but had acquired another firm of about equal size, but very dispersed across Canada. For them, while they looked to move to the cloud, they had a lot of challenges that they had to address. First, they didn't want to invest their CapEx in building out a new infrastructure. They had now two companies that they were looking at merging and bringing together. So they didn't want to spend their CapEx, and their IT resources in both companies were stretched, and frankly, they had reduction plans in both organizations too. So the goals were to reduce the hardware overlap between the two companies, to replace the aging infrastructure, reclaim some data center space, unify their operations, and leverage IT resources for more strategic needs. And lastly, because they had gone from being somewhat local but quite dense to very sparse across the country, they needed a new network, a new national VPN put in place. So very quickly, by moving these services to the cloud and taking it out of their own infrastructure environment, we were able to, just to go through those goals again and talk you through some of the things that this customer did, they were able to bring together all of their infrastructure from those two data centers down into, I say one data center, but I'll say one cloud environment stretched across multiple data centers. They were able to replace, in some cases as new as 1.5-year-old servers, in some cases 10-plus-year-old servers, with, I'll say, 0-year-old servers. Because the age of something you don't own, that you don't manage, that you aren't involved in, ceases to matter. So they no longer had to worry about aging infrastructure and so forth. They reclaimed virtually all of the data center space in both of their two locations, and they were able to unify the operations around one common project that both were able to work on together. They leveraged those resources then to work on the applications and higher layer things without having to worry about walking around checking on blinking fault lights and failed fans and replacing hard drives and all the stuff that comes along with running an IT environment. And then, of course, built out the national network as well. So this, for them, was a public cloud environment that they were able to deploy. Fully managed, on demand, scalable, with a predictable monthly billing approach. So they were able to see their IT as a service and finally realize that dream that they were looking for. And I talked about before, no hardware, no delay. It's a special moment the first time we invariably hear from our customers that are used to ordering something and waiting for it to come and then racking it and then getting in the data center and getting it cabled and getting it configured and getting the operating system installed and going through all those steps. It's an interesting experience to finally talk to one of them who's just gone through it the first time and said, I went and I clicked and it was done. There was nothing more. It was just done. It's true. A few minutes later, they took the hardware out of the equation. So no hardware means no delay. No waiting. With this customer, I remember thinking that, I normally think in terms of waiting for the CDW truck and my frustration, or the UPS truck, but being in logistics, they might have more, they might be more willing to wait for that sort of stuff. Another case study for you was an investment firm that we worked with who they would focus on some large deals, sort of an investment banking kind of firm that was putting companies together. Every time they would go through that, they would have to scale up their infrastructure. Sometimes that infrastructure would last for a couple of months. Maybe things didn't go ahead. Sometimes it had to last for 6 or 8 months. Sometimes it had to last for a year. But invariably, as soon as the deal was done and everything was closed down, they ended up with a bunch of infrastructure that just went back into the pool. Well, this really didn't work for them. This demand-based component of their business forced them to buy lots of stuff and then decommission lots of stuff and then buy lots of stuff and decommission lots of stuff. They were a very ideal candidate for the cloud, but had had a couple of failed attempts before due to security concerns. They had some dedicated systems within each of these deal environments. Every time they put a new deal together, they had a couple of dedicated systems and a couple things that they didn't think were quite as dedicated, or rather, they'd put in place a dedicated infrastructure every time the deal would go live. But being appropriately paranoid about security and requiring for security reasons that database infrastructure remain secluded on a per deal basis required them to take a bit of a different approach. So some of the goals, they needed to very rapidly be able to scale up, and as rapidly, they needed to be able to scale back down. In cloud infrastructure, you hear a lot of people talk about, oh, I have 1,000 servers and I need to scale to 2,000 overnight. I'll tell you, in Canadian business, it's a far more likely story for somebody to have 10 servers and be looking to scale all the way up to 12 overnight or in the next week. And that number may be 100 going to 110 or 120. But the number of Canadian mid-sized businesses that need to scale from X to 10X overnight, if anybody in the room is, I'd love to hear those stories. I'm not hearing them. So the ability to scale up by a few servers or 10 or 20 and scale right back down once it's over, whether that's due to deals or tax season or anything seasonal or specific to the business, is very valuable.